Well, we all know by now the ACC could absolutely implode. But what if it does?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, that be college football, realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've always got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers, join today, and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So, the ACC is facing a bit of a crisis. Its two biggest football brands at the moment, Florida State and Clemson, are suing to leave the league. Now, my sense is that that's going to happen because that's been the trend in college athletics. When realignment moves that leave teams behind and consolidate to the Power Two want to be made, they tend to get made. However, this may surprise you, I'm not a lawyer. I thought about it once upon a time, but I decided to talk about sports instead. So far, it's going okay. Just okay. But I think that for the ACC, they're of course going to attempt to keep them in the league. And that's the best outcome if you're Jim Phillips, the commissioner, is you keep Florida State and Clemson right there. And you can reassess everything with, the revisit clause and the deal with ESPN in 2027 and everything like that. But I suspect that one thing will happen. I'm also not arguing the case. I haven't read all of the legal briefs. I don't know the applicable case law and everything of the sort. I know that everybody in the YouTube comments does. I do not. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, and it's perfectly possible, that the ACC hangs on to both Florida State and Clemson. What, at that point, do you do as a league? How do you function when your two premier programs, who have won national championships within the last decade in this wonderful sport, Florida State, the final BCS championship, and Clemson twice in the CFP era, and they've appeared in the playoff and national championship game several other times. If you're able to keep them there, but they're not happy, how do you proceed? Do you look at your revenue distribution structure to try to keep them there in the long run, or do you just accept that at some point in time an opt-out will come about, whether it's 2027 or 2020 or 2036, and they're just going to depart? You probably have to just accept that that'll happen and keep everybody else as happy as possible if and when that does come to pass. So it's a really, really tricky spot to be in because I don't know that there's anything the ACC could have done as a league to fix this, to prevent this from ever having come to fruition. These two lawsuits from Florida State and Clemson. And my argument for that goes something like this. Even if you had the ability to renegotiate a media deal, because the ACC's deal is probably at a discount compared to what it would get if it were negotiating on the open market today. I don't know by how much, but the general consensus is that $36 million on average over the course of the deal is not what they'd be able to get. Is that all it's about? Is that it? If the number for just Florida State and Clemson were $50 million, would that keep them there? Because I don't think it would. I think that realignment is about a lot of different factors. And of course, presidents vote on realignment, not athletic directors or coaches. That'll be, imprinted on my gravestone one day. But I think that for a lot of these universities, they don't want the perception hit of not being at the big kids table. And no amount of money that the league could realistically come up with can prevent that from happening. You just can't. Ask yourself this question. You've got multiple national championships in the most important sport in the last 10 years. 2013, 14, so what's that? 11 seasons of college football. The ACC has won 3 of those national championships, and guess what? They're still behind the Big Ten and the SEC considerably, both financially and the caliber of their league. And I don't know that there's a move that they could have realistically made because if USC and UCLA were, shopping themselves around as they were to the Big Ten in conjunction with Fox to create this move that, set off all of this realignment stuff, were they ever going to consider the ACC? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But your goal as a conference is to make the most money, to keep your members happy, to win the most championships possible, particularly in the biggest sports that people pay the most attention to. And so I think the ACC is in just a really difficult position in that their hands are kind of tied with this deal. Of course, they're going to try and keep the teams in the league, but if they can't, I don't know what else they could have done. And I think that stinks because there's a lot of history in that conference. There's a lot of tradition there, and it could all go away. It's not guaranteed to, right? As I've talked about on the show before, the ACC is not guaranteed to die if both Florida State and Clemson leave. Like, you could have a league that has Miami and North Carolina. Remember, Stanford, Cal, and SMU are in the mix now. Your top 5 football programs being Miami, North Carolina, NC State. I don't know who else could fill the void. There are options in there. I'm not saying it's as good and as deep as the Big 12. It'd probably be a notch below, but it's at least comparable. It's in the same discussion. It's closer to the Big 12 than the Big 12 is to the Big 10 or the SEC at that point, unquestionably. And so if the ACC loses the lawsuit and Florida State and Clemson leave, you try to hang on to as many members as you can. I mean, what else can you do at that point? But if the ACC wins the lawsuit, I think you have to just let Florida State and Clemson deal with the consequences of their own actions. Because at that point, what else is there to do? No one's going to join the ACC that's going to make you a power and put you on par with the Big Ten and the SEC. That's what I mean by power, is power 2. Because, of course, they'd remain very clearly one of the Power 4 conferences. But would they be able to get to where the Big Ten and the SEC are competitively, financially, in terms of the number of auto berths they get to the college football playoff? No, they absolutely cannot do that. That move doesn't exist. Even if you went out and got, if you somehow went on the attack and grabbed some Big 12 schools, like if you went and got, say, Utah, who, as I've talked about on the show before, has an exit clause essentially from their contract with the Big 12. They're not tied to that league for the long run like other members such as Colorado are. What if you went and got Utah and, grabbed a Baylor or Oklahoma State? I'm just throwing out names. Don't overreact to in the comment section. And you grabbed Oregon State and Washington State as well. And the ACC tried to become a completely coastal conference. I mean, that could be a good move if you're the league. But guess what? Is that going to keep Clemson and Florida State happy? No. Is that going to get you on par with the Big Ten SEC? No. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. And if it sounds dire, that's because it kind of is. But I don't think the ACC is guaranteed to lose this lawsuit here. I think there is a possibility they could win. And then at that point, you have to say, sorry, guys, we already beat you in court. We don't have to give you anything, and you can operate the league however you choose. Deion Sanders runs his program however he chooses, and that's what most coaches do, to be clear, and Deion does it as much as anybody. So what's the latest up in Boulder? What are they working on? Well, we'll talk about that next. First, this episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets like mine because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. And you may very well be betting on a 1 seed. All 4 are alive into the Sweet 16. Been a while since that's happened. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. I like Houston personally. I like them going into the bracket. They are my bracket selection. I'm a one bracket kind of guy, and when it gets busted, FanDuel's the place you want to go. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. This episode also brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. The latest in Boulder with my man Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, joining me here on Locked On College Football. Kevin, last year the offensive line was the biggest problem for Colorado. They've got the skill positions mostly figured out. Quarterback, receiver, corner, one of which is the same guy, of course, in Travis Hunter. But going into spring football here for Colorado, what is the biggest priority for Deion Sanders and company?
Yeah, I think just building continuity. Last year, I went to the spring game, and there was just kind of this consensus where 90% of the guys I was watching were not going to be on the team in a few weeks. And so they have majority of the dudes that are going to be on the team, so they need to build that connection. I know a lot of people get on me all the time for saying the offensive line doesn't need to have a relationship or whatever, but they do. They got 5 new guys. Realistically, no one from last year will be starting on the offensive line, so they need to build continuity. And then they just need depth at a lot of positions, or they need to establish that depth. And I think they have it. It's just figuring out who goes where and when.
Along that offensive line, 5 new starters. I hear that, and it gives me pause. Now, I did look at Colorado's win total once upon a time, see 4.5, and say, over. And then I'm not saying it's the power of Locked On College Football. I'm just saying that after that happened multiple times on the show, the win total was moved to 5.5. If they're going over that and therefore making a bowl game, you can't have the same offensive line play as last year. It's got to be better. So as the Buffs and their coaching staff, which has also had some reshuffling this offseason, approach spring practice, what are they looking for? Are they trying to find starters? Are they just trying to establish continuity with the guys that everyone pretty much agrees, yeah, this is going to be the starting unit?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think realistically, you kind of know all these guys that come in. You don't bring in a Big Ten transfer who started multiple years, and he's not coming in to sit. You don't bring in one of the top offensive lineman transfers in the portal and Justin Maris from UTEP. He's not coming to sit either. So there's Jordan Seaton, 5-star from IMG. He's not coming to sit. Like, all these guys are there ready to start. I think there's like 1 or 2 positions kind of up for grabs. Like, I would say right tackle is the one that I'd look out for, and then maybe center is another one where there's a position battle. But for the most part, they kind of know or have an idea who's going to be starting, or at least they will. And it's just kind of building that connection. Realistically, they just have to be average, which is like the bare minimum for you never want to be average in anything. But when you look at how bad the offensive line was last year, just be average, and this team will be worlds and beyonds better than what they were.
Yeah, I mean, average, I think, has a bad moniker because it implies that you're not striving to be great. But if USC had an average defense last year, they would have won at least 8, probably 9 or 10 games. If Colorado had an average offensive line, they're probably a bowl team. So average is not always the worst thing in the world. But a guy who's definitely not average is Shedeur Sanders. Burst on the scene coming over from Jackson State last year and was one of the leading passers in all of college football through the first couple of weeks. And then, the shortcomings of that Colorado roster came to fruition a little bit. But Sanders' talent is undeniable. He's an NFL sort of guy. Let's say he has average protection, which to him is going to feel like just this wondrous world with rainbows and ponies and everything of the sort. When you think about what he's bringing to the table and the weapons he's got, what are your expectations for him going into spring ball?
Yeah, last year he broke records with the poor offensive line, and what we learned was an offensive system he did not like. He kind of made it seem that Sean Lewis's offense was predicated on wide receivers running a lot of choice routes, which means a lot of the things were out of his hands. So going into 2024, I expect him to have better protection, which we obviously know kind of affected his play, his health. And he's also going to be in an offense that I think is better tailored to his game. So it's kind of crazy to think that those 2 factors were kind of holding him back last season, and he still threw 27 touchdowns and 3 picks. So I imagine he's going to hit that 35 touchdown threshold as long as he continues to protect the ball and not kind of get into predicaments at times where he's trying to do too much. I think he could put up some astronomical numbers that kind of shock some people because I think there's a lot of like, how much higher can he go? But realistically, when you factor in how bad the offensive line was, and he didn't like the system. So if you factor that in as well, I feel like he's due for a bigger year, which is kind of crazy to say.
The Buffs coaching staff has got some new faces there, but certainly that's not the only area. A lot of transfers, and that's really the essential part of roster building in the eyes of Deion Sanders. I mean, they are out-recruited by a group of 5 schools at the high school ranks, but that doesn't give them one of the least talented rosters in the Big 12. I don't know that it's the most talented, but certainly I think it's closer towards the top than it is the bottom. But when you talk about newcomers in Shedeur Sanders, everyone knows he's going to be throwing the football to Travis Hunter. I don't think that's a big mystery for defensive coordinators or college football fans anywhere across the land. But who else has to play a part in this Colorado offense? Maybe someone that you're looking for in spring football to showcase, okay, this guy's clearly the number 2 receiver, the number 2 target for Colorado.
Yeah, I love that question. And there's like a big kind of discussion and talk about this in the Colorado community. And everyone is looking at Florida Atlantic wide receiver LeJontay Wester. So everyone remembers Jimmy Horn Jr. from USF. He was kind of like the guy in spring. And then Xavier Weaver also came over from USF and kind of surpassed Jimmy and was kind of up there with Travis as Shedeur's favorite target. Early on in spring, there's a lot of buzz and a lot of people around the program think that he could steal Jimmy Horn's starting spot out of the slot. He's faster than him. He's as sure-handed as it gets. He had 108 catches last season with guys like Casey Thompson and Daniel Richardson throwing him the ball. So imagine what he could do with really good or even great quarterback play. So I would go LeJontay Wester. And then they also brought in Will Sheppard from Vanderbilt, who is 6'4", and he's massive. And they had some little dropsies issues last season at Vanderbilt, but he still put up over 1,000 yards in the SEC. And I think once he gets to campus, he will be someone that will kind of carve out. You can't keep that size and speed off the field. You just can't.
Kevin, you ever see Moneyball, the movie?
I love Moneyball.
One of the greatest movies of all time. Billy Beane, portrayed, of course, by the great Brad Pitt, one of my favorite actors, has a line in which he's talking about how the Oakland A's are a feeder system for the New York Yankees. Well, tragically, cover your ears, Vanderbilt fans, that's the way it feels sometimes for the Commodores football program, because you think about Vanderbilt football and you go, oh man, they can't win it. I mean, since James Franklin left, it just hasn't been the same, which is absolutely true. They haven't really sniffed the top 25 since he departed, but they have had some supremely talented players. So if you're listening or watching and you think, well, bringing a guy from Vanderbilt, what could that possibly mean? Do not sleep on him, because that's a guy that I think could, I don't know that he could push Travis Hunter to be the leading receiver because that chemistry is already ingrained. But I think as the season goes on, I think he could put, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, and I want your thoughts here, that each of those top 2 receivers for the Buffs could have a 1,000-yard season.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. And whenever we talk about Travis Hunter, I want to put this out there, and I'll speak for Spencer on this one occasion. We're never talking about Travis Hunter losing his job. We're just talking about Travis Hunter maybe seeing a smaller role to help preserve him. Me and Spencer are both in the camp of, I think, where we need to maximize Travis Hunter. And I don't know if playing him 24/7, 365 days a year is like the best way to do it. And so Will Sheppard is one of those guys where he's reliable. He's a big target. And he's someone that Shedeur can rely on. Also want to shout out Omarion Miller, who was the guy that exploded against USC.
Big time.
Yeah, the new wide receivers coach said he's falling in love with him. So I think that's something worth noting. He's there right now, and Will Sheppard is not. So he could kind of get that edge over Will Sheppard.
If you've got Travis Hunter, Omarion Miller, and Will Sheppard as your top 3 receivers,
right?
How many Big 12 teams can go toe-to-toe with those 3 guys? I mean, seriously, that can't be worse.
Big 12, 0. Maybe the Big 12s of the past, 3, counting Oklahoma and Texas. But I don't think there's a single Big 12 team, at least I don't want to discredit anybody, but I don't think there's a team out there that is matching up with them.
That could be a fascinating question, but I mean, going 3 deep like that those are just, you got the young guy and Omarion Miller with just tremendous upside and potential and possibility, and also some proven production. Everyone knows what Travis Hunter can do, and then you have a 1,000-yard receiver at the Power 5 level from last year. That's a pretty.
He was like second in the country in catches.
Yeah, that's tough to beat. Real quick, Kevin, let's get you out of here on this new defensive staff. What are the expectations?
The expectations are they need to stop the run. They need to be better in the secondary. Robert Livingston doesn't have any defensive coordinator experience, but he is a safeties coach. So that secondary should be pretty locked down. You have Deion Sanders and someone who has NFL experience as a secondaries coach. So I expect that unit to be on their P's and Q's dotting their I's and crossing their T's nonstop. In terms of stopping the run, they just need big bodies to make plays. And that sounds simple, and I'm not trying to like make defense sound stupid, but realistically, everyone ran the ball down their throats last season. That was their biggest weakness. If they cannot stop the run, which I'm looking at the linebacker group as their weakest group right now, if they can't stop the run or help stop the run, it could be another long year, and it's going to be like a typical Big 12 team where it's like, we need 50 points to win. We need 40 to stay in the game. That's what it will be if the defense doesn't live up to the expectations of stopping the run and kind of taking away the big plays.
Would not have it any other way over in the good old Big 12. Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs. Thanks so much, Kevin.
Thank you.
Is UCF the best group of 5 new team in the Big 12 to pop next year? We'll answer that question next. This week's March Madness Bracket Highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest, just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs. These guys were able to take it to the next level. The North Carolina Tar Heels can only be described as the Nissan Armada. This one scene is as hardcore as it gets out there, so no wonder they've secured a spot in the Sweet 16 this Thursday against Alabama. Iowa State is the Nissan Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have really created a lane for themselves, entering the tournament as one of the hottest teams in the country. They're taking on Illinois in the Sweet 16. A lot of chalk in this year's bracket, but you know what? It's still been great, and the NC State Wolfpack are this week's Nissan Rogue. The team absolutely surprised us all with a powerful performance in their first 2 games in the tournament, with wins over Texas Tech and Oakland to get them into the Sweet 16 against Marquette. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada. Go find your next big adventure. Shop at nissanusa.com. So Vegas thinks that of the formerly 4 newest Big 12 schools, of course there are 4 new ones going into 2024 that are just slightly newer than the schools formerly of the Group of 5, UCF is going to be the best of them. I agree with the odds makers. So the Knights have got a win total of wait for it, 7.5. Now, if I asked you right now, how many games did UCF win in their first year in the Big 12? How many do you think they won? Total on the season, conference and non-conference put together, a 12-game year, they won 6. They were the only team making the jump with BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati to make a bowl game. And UCF got to that bowl game and lost. Bonus points if anyone can tell me who they lost to. You have 30 seconds of showtime before I will just kind of spit out the answer here. But I think that UCF has a chance to be the best of that group. Does that mean they contend in the Big 12? I don't think so. I think their total being at 7.5 is actually overvalued. I think it is one game too high because for Gus Malzahn and company, they have had, by all accounts, a solid offseason. When you look at the transfer portal class they've brought in, 9 players from formerly Power 5 institutions a year ago, that's a pretty solid haul for a school that was playing in the American Athletic Conference in 2022 and just got to the Big 12 in 2023. By the way, they lost to Georgia Tech in their bowl game. The Yellow Jackets finished with a 7-6 record last year. But the Knights bring in, of course, KJ Jefferson. Now, KJ Jefferson is someone who I think is going to fit Gus Malzahn's scheme perfectly. Is he my favorite quarterback in the Big 12 or in college football? No. But is he my least favorite? Also no. I'm always a fan of guys that, have had solid, steady careers, feel like maybe there's a little bit more to them. I think KJ Jefferson has that aspect about him. And I think that when Gus Malzahn looks at KJ Jefferson, he doesn't see the same level of talent because few guys, if ever, can match that sort of level. But I think he looks and sees a few shades of Cam Newton. Big, burly guy, going to run, will run over you, not going to slide, not going to avoid contact, probably isn't, a big NFL guy. Cam Newton, of course, was. But KJ Jefferson is a capable, experienced starting quarterback. And look, UCF didn't have bad quarterback play last year from John Reese Plumlee. He was only able to play in 10 games, but he completed 63% of his passes and he was just under 220 yards a game. It's not bad. But I think Gus Malzahn's best teams have gotten more from the quarterback position, and KJ Jefferson will allow him to do that. I think schematically, Malzahn is somebody who I've always liked as a coach. I did not think that he was done right by Auburn to be let go after the year that they had and, the track record that he had there. And then they hired Brian Harsin and it got even worse. Things are, of course, trending better with Hugh Freeze. But when Malzahn was fired and then Harsin was brought in, that was always puzzling to me. So there's just this little part of me that looks at Gus Malzahn and says, I want to root for that guy. I want to root for that guy. I don't think he should have been relieved of his duties over there. Things had not bottomed out over at Auburn, and then they did with the guy that they hired to replace him, of course. But though I like UCF the most of the former G5 teams in the Big 12 going into their second years, the other teams could all have tough years, by the way. And you've got 2 win totals at 4.5, 1 at 5.5 amongst BYU, Houston, and Cincinnati. And you've got a new coach taking over in Willie Fritz down there in Houston. And look, I think he can succeed. I don't know that it's going to be immediate. In fact, I don't believe it's going to be immediate. I think that'll be a little bit of a slower build coming over from Tulane. You've got Kalani Sitake, who's proven he is a capable head coach. I do not like at all what BYU's quarterback situation is. I like Jefferson more than, a Gary Bohannon or a Trayson Bourget battle that they've got brewing over in Provo. And then you look at what Cincinnati's done, and sure, they brought in some Power 5 transfers, and they've done all right, but I don't know. There doesn't feel like there's a lot of energy. It feels like since making the college football playoff, it's really come back down to earth for the Bearcats. So interested to see what they do in year 2 in the Big 12, because certainly it's a capable program. But I think that UCF, as the win total reflects, is the best of the bunch. I do think 7.5 is a tad high. So here's why. Not because I don't think that you've got a good coach, because you've got a capable quarterback who I think Malzahn can get a little bit more out of than what he's shown in his career, but because this schedule, as far as the Big 12 goes, is not exactly a walk in the park. So they start with New Hampshire and Sam Houston. Those will be a couple of wins. An FCS opponent and Sam Houston in Conference USA, not going to be a problem at FBC Mortgage Stadium. Then they go at TCU, who I think is one of the more underrated teams and kind of flying under the radar in the Big 12 this year. The Andy Avalos hired defensive coordinator, I think, is a really, really good one for Sonny Dykes and company. They have to go to Fort Worth to begin Big 12 play, then host Colorado. That Colorado team that we were talking about early on the show, that's a fascinating game right there. I think that at week 4 in the season, week 5 actually, because that'll be a game off a bye. Week 5 in the year, that's going to be really telling, because I expect UCF to start 2-0 and probably lose that game to TCU at 2-1. The difference, just in your locker room, amongst your fan base, as a coaching staff, the pressure, the excitement, everything feels different between 3-1 and 2-2. Very, very different there. So that game against Colorado, notable, but then they have to go at Florida. And I got to tell you, I wouldn't push it past Gus Malzahn to go in there and win that game. But Billy Napier better not lose it. It's one thing to lose games to, a Utah last year with a backup quarterback and they get embarrassed on the road to begin the season. But the Gators, you can't lose to an in-state program who's competing at the power level for its second season. You can't do that. You cannot do it. So that's a house money sort of game for UCF. I don't expect them to win, but boy, if they did, it would put people on notice. They come back home, play Cincinnati. They go at Iowa State. Should we just call them Josh Pate's Iowa State Cyclones at this point? I don't know, maybe. But Matt Campbell, good coach. That's a tough game. Come back home against BYU, very winnable. Then you host Arizona. Arguably the best team on your schedule to that point. I think either TCU or maybe Florida could be in the same reign or in the same category as Arizona, but I think the Wildcats at home is a tough one. Then you have to go at Arizona State, a place where you haven't been before. And look, Kenny Dillingham doesn't have sky-high expectations in year 2, but I can assure you they're going to be better. They're going to be better. There's still 2 games to go on their regular season schedule, and they play, wait for it, at West Virginia. Does anybody want to go to Morgantown? I don't. Ray Kroc, the former, that's not the right name, Ray Anderson, beg your pardon. Ray Kroc was the founder of McDonald's, but Ray Anderson, the former athletic director at Arizona State, he didn't want to go. Or maybe it was Michael Crow, didn't want to go to Morgantown. Nobody wants to go to Morgantown because they've got great fans. They also have a pretty good football team. And then they come back home and host Utah. Those 2 games at the end of the year, I struggle seeing UCF winning both of them. And frankly, I'll probably, barring them wildly impressing me in their first 10 games, pick them to lose both of those contests. So I think that schedule is tough. I think it is appropriate to look at, where UCF is at and think, okay, amongst the transitioning teams, they've fully transitioned, at some level, but still there's an adjustment phase to, attract the caliber of player you need to compete with everybody else. I think that for UCF, making a bowl game would be a successful season. Right now, you're trying to establish credibility to the entire country that, hey, we're in the Big 12, we're new here, we came from a weaker conference, and we belong. And right now, UCF is in the driver's seat more than the other 3 new programs to do just that, because they've made a bowl game. Nobody else has done that yet. Nobody else has had the ability to say we've gotten to just 500 so far. I think making a bowl game is a solid year, but I struggle to see only 4 losses to go over 7.5 wins for UCF, just because as Big 12 schedules go, that one's tough. I think it's big that you get Arizona at home and Arizona State on the road, and you get Utah at home, but I think Utah is going to be really, really good. I think UCF will be solid, but I don't know about an 8 to 9 win team, at least not yet. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.